Hey, we're here to continue talking about Flexique on wafer paper, a topic of great interest. There are other topics we talk about in other episodes. You can check those out in the Flexique Fridays playlist. At the end of the last episode, episode 5, we were talking about how to join two sections of Flexique covered wafer paper together. Well, here it is. Now, this was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, so you can see that it's still very flexible. Pretty cool, huh? What I'm going to do is cut off this section here to show you that you can still cut it very nicely. And then I'm going to take some Flexique that I've warmed up and add another very light coat on top of what we've done before. Okay? And you'll see why in just a little bit. But it's just a very light coating. There you go. Now, here is the piece of the heart that we had cut out the last time, and it's still very flexible. Speaking of long-term flexibility, here is the heart that we cut out of the tie-dye Flexique a few episodes ago, a long time ago, and it's still really flexible. Now, if you wanted to make a super large piece of fabric, why not use larger pieces of wafer paper? For instance, one that's 11 by 17. Here's one that Chef Rubber makes. It's 11 by 17. Can you imagine attaching several of these together? You can make a fabric pretty large, pretty quick, right? We talked about coloring Flexique. You can color Flexique before you spread it onto your wafer paper. You can spread it onto your wafer paper and then color it, or luster it, whatever color you want. Or why not just take colored wafer paper and put Flexique on it? You've got several different ways of incorporating color into your cake scheme. Okay, so now let's take this piece of Flexique over wafer paper that we coated with a little bit more Flexique and use some of the Sugar Art Sweetheart luster dust. I'm going to luster what we had just coated with Flexique because it is dry to touch, and by doing so you pretty much hide that seam. If it's even darker, you can't see the seam anymore. Right? Good. All right, so I'm going to put this aside for now. And let's suppose that you had a piece of Flexique over wafer paper that you coated with Flexique, but you didn't put enough on, or you only coated one side, and it got a little too stiff for you, okay? This is a little stiffer than you'd like. Well, there is a way to rejuvenate it. Let me show you. First of all, grab yourself some warm water. Take the Flexique covered wafer paper and just put it into the water until it soaks up enough to become kind of flexible again. It'll feel like a piece of wafer paper. All right? And then you can wipe it off with some paper towels. All right? And see, it's got a little bit of the flexibility, most of the flexibility back. So you put it back down onto your sheet of silicone, and Then reapply your Flexique onto the wafer paper. Make sure you put enough on. Like that. There you go. And that's all there is to it. Now, once you let that dry, you can trim it and pick it up, and you'll find that it is just as flexible as before. You can even flip it over and do the other side if you want, but for now, I'm just going to leave that like that. How about that? Okay, so let's talk about the question that a lot of people ask before we get into some of the other things you can do with Flexique. The question that's asked quite often is, how do I attach it to my cake? Okay, we talked about how to do that with Flexique. It's basically the same thing with the Flexique on wafer paper. You've got to make sure that if you're attaching it to soft buttercream, no problem, it attaches very nicely. If you're going to put it on fondant, any kind of gelatin product that you put on fondant will start to draw water out of the fondant, so you got to seal the fondant a little bit. Edible lacquer spray, chocolate spray, some good piping gel, or Nicholas Lodge's Super Bond beeswax product. We also found that if you mix a 1/4 cup of Flexique glue with a tablespoon of cornstarch, and then spread that mixture onto the fondant and attach your Flexique covered wafer paper, it sticks very nicely and it doesn't pull the water out. We also tried warming up some glucose and then using just a little bit onto the fondant and then attaching your Flexique covered wafer paper onto it, and it's not a problem either. The best solution is using that cornstarch with Flexique glue mixture. All right, so what are these other things that you can do with Flexique, you ask? Let me tell you. First of all, let's go back to the other piece of wafer paper that we were dealing with before that was covered with Flexique. I'm going to add another layer of Flexique on top just to give it some tackiness. So what you can do is take regular wafer paper, put it into a blender, get it chopped up real fine. Then, once you've got your Flexique while it's still wet, like this is, take that chopped up blended wafer paper and dust it on to your Flexique. Okay, so see, it's still a little tacky. That's the right time to do it. We just dust on this shredded mixture right onto the Flexique that's still tacky, just like that. So what happens is you get a textured suede kind of look once you dust that off, right? And there you have it. So that's one thing you can do. We've talked about before flattening gelatin. You know, if you take just regular gelatin and you spread it on a sheet, how it bubbles up when it dries. And it's really hard to put it into a hole punch, right? If you add a teaspoonful of Flexique to it, it'll dry flatter so that then you can put it into a paper punch very easily. Here's an example. You can put it right into a paper punch and make your sequence very nicely that way, see? You can also do that with Flexique over wafer paper that's colored. Here's some that's colored. I'm going to put it into a hole punch and punch holes or punch sequences. There you go. And here's an example of how you create sequins very easily. They're lightweight, they're flat, they're colored the way you want them to be colored. And then you can apply them very easily to your cake. All right, punch outs. You can also use craft cutters with Flexique on wafer paper. And here you have an example of a heart that's created by punching out a shape from Flexique on wafer paper. Now, when we were talking with Nicholas Lodge about this product, and we talked about using a pizza wheel cutter to cut shapes, or cookie cutters to cut shapes, he said, why don't you just put it in a pasta machine? Hey, that's a really good idea, so that's what we did. And here's an example. Here's a piece of Flexique wafer paper, Flexique on wafer paper, and here is a pasta machine. I'm going to put the Flexique on wafer paper right into the pasta machine, and there we go. And there it is. It scores it and lets you create fringe so very, very easily. Okay, so you can actually cut strips of wafer paper using a pasta machine. With that, you can create edible floral tape. I got to credit Mary Sanaga, one of our certified instructors, with this idea. She takes the strip of wafer paper and just puts it into some colored Flexique, okay? Just puts it into colored Flexique, and then uses her fingers to squeegee it right off, and then lays it down on the silicone mat to dry. Oops, pulled it too hard, but you get the idea. Now it is a little messy, so that's why when you're doing this, you want to have a nice wet rag to wipe off any of the excess. Okay, so I let it dry for just a minute or two, and now you can see it doesn't come off on my fingers. I'm going to take it and lift it right off the silicone and use it. Suppose this is a stem of a flower that I was making. I just wrap it around itself to create some edible floral tape that can also act as a barrier to any non-food grade things like the stem of a rose. So there's your edible floral tape. Don't want to bore you with too much all at once. There is definitely more, and we'll wrap it up next time, so come on back. See ya.